that a rabbit in your pocket, or you just happy to see me?
A film that mixed a hard-boiled detective story with classic cartoons in an adventure that wasn't quite as kid-friendly as it had first appeared.
Just like a Toon to drop a safe in a guy's head.
It's also a technical tour de force, mixing live action and animation at a time when that was harder to pull off than the lid from a jar of pickles. I mean, some say you tap the lid on the table, others say run it under hot water, or wrap towels around it. In the end, I just went pickle-free. The only pickle in this movie is the one that the title character finds himself in.
That's the connection.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit is Robert Zemeckis' 1988 live-action movie, but one that's more animated than an arachnophobe convention held in the same venue as a spider lovers conference. The first thing to know, this is a world where cartoons are real, where they live side by side with people. I mean actual cartoons, not just cartoonish villains.
It says rabbit gets clunked, rabbit sees stars. Not birds, stars!
It's 1947 and seedy Los Angeles private eye Eddy Valiant has taken up residence inside a bottle and is barely getting by. He takes on an easy job snooping for studio boss R.K. Maroon despite his own dislike of Toons. One of Maroon's biggest stars, Roger Rabbit, is having marital difficulties, and Eddie's job is to get photographic evidence of Mrs. Rabbit playing patty cake with Marvin Acme, the owner of Toontown.
It can't be! It can't be! Jessica's my wife!
Roger Rabbit reacts to this news, well, all things considered, not so great. Acme turns up dead, and the suspect is one rabbit, Roger.
I hope you're proud of yourself.
Eddie noses around the crime scene, but that's when Judge Doom and his weasels show up. Doom's way of dealing with wayward toons, well, any toon, is to immerse them into the dip. That's a powerful combination of solvents that sure beats liquid paper as a way for erasing typos. Oh, and it's lethal to toons, melting them like a stick of really fancy butter with its own built-in heating element. Jessica Rabbit wants Eddie to investigate who framed her husband, while Eddie's weary girlfriend Dolores isn't impressed.
Dabbling in watercolors, Eddie?
It was well known among the Toons that Marvin Acme would leave Toontown to the Toons in his will, but if nobody finds the will in time, Toontown will find itself with new owners who want to knock down the place in order to build this thing called a freeway.
First they buy the red car, then they want to get their hands on Toontown.
Roger tries to enlist Eddy Valiant's help, but Eddie's not interested until, of course, he has no choice.
Hold still, will ya?
Does this help?
Dolores helps the pair where possible, but when R.K. Maroon also ends up dead, it looks like Jessica might even be the killer. Eddie will soon have no choice but to head into Toontown to rescue Roger.
Gesundheit. Thank you.
It turns out that Judge Doom not only killed Marvin Acme and R.K. Maroon, but also owns the company that's going to end up with Toontown. He's also the man who killed Eddy Valiant's brother, and if that wasn't enough of a coincidence, it turns out that Doom himself is a Toon. That's a really pleasant and convenient stroke of luck, on the level of discovering that you had one of 5 gold tickets to a chocolate factory tour where you could win a lifetime supply of chocolate, and then you found out that it wasn't a Hershey's factory.
Scotch on the rocks. And I mean ice!
Acme's will turns out to have been written in Acme's disappearing and reappearing ink on a love letter, and so the Toons are safe. Roger's off the hook, and Eddie's no longer a big stick in the mud about Toons.
Come on, Roger, let's go home. I'll bake you a carrot cake.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a film that in many ways made no sense from a business perspective in the mid-80s. It's a heavily animated film at a time when very few big-budget animated movies were being made. It's also not really a film for very young kids, as it's a little scary and dark in places. Though obviously it's not as scary as the laundry room at the Spider Lovers conference.
I think Maroon played the part of sound mind and your wife the sound body.
Why, I resent that innuendo.
And it's filled with innuendos that would fly over the heads of the audience most likely to want to see a film about a cartoon rabbit.
I got a 50-year-old lust and a 3-year-old dinky.
For a big-budgeted mainstream film, it's also got a very tart sense of humour, poking fun at the terrible public transport situation in Los Angeles.
Ain't you got a car?
Who needs a car in L.A.? We got the best public transportation system in the world.
And these are lovable cartoons with very human frailties. Until, of course, you drop something on their head. They're almost indestructible, hence the dip. The entire film's plot revolves around some sort of liquid. Washing up gags, Eddie being a boozer, the dip erasing the paint of a toon, and the film's MacGuffin, Acme's will being written using Trek ink. I laughed a fair bit during this movie, so truth be told, there may have been some leakage.
And thanks for nothing.
The film parodies the hard-boiled detective genre, plumbing all of the tropes and cliches of a troubled private eye, and then mixes them with a story where nobody finds real-life Toons at all odd. I mean, if I woke up one day and there was a giant alligator sitting across from me at the breakfast table, then that means either last night was pretty epic, or today is not going to go at all well.
Do you mean to tell me that you could have taken your hand out of that cuff at any time?
No, not at any time. Only when it was funny.
It started with Gary K. Wolfe's 1981 novel Who Censored Roger Rabbit, where a detective, Eddie Valiant, is hired by comic book character Roger Rabbit, and soon Valiant's client ends up murdered and, okay, well, it gets much darker than the eventual film. Disney soon bought the rights to the book as a basis of a potential animated film, and some animated tests were worked on in the early 80s. Robert Zemeckis expressed interest in directing, but the poor performance of his early films put an end to that notion. The Roger Rabbit project, which we could in theory shorten to Project, really gained momentum in 1985, especially once Zemeckis had had back-to-back hits with Romancing the Stone and Back to the Future.
It's tough to make a rhyme. If I get stuck, I'm out of luck.
Disney's biggest hit in recent years was Splash. But now Disney had new management in the form of Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg, where over a few short years, Disney would begin releasing waves of hit movies, whether it's under its own brand, films aimed at older audiences through Touchstone, and a revival of its animated movies. Roger Rabbit was sort of a combination of all three.
Please, don't mind me.
The scripts for the movie took some concepts from the novel, but also brought a lot of its own ideas to the table.
Our left can be a very powerful thing. Why, sometimes in life, it's the only weapon we have.
We had the characters of Roger Rabbit, Jessica Rabbit, Baby Herman, Benny the Cab, and the Weasels of the Toon Patrol. But most of the other Toon characters in the movie would be plucked from decades of animation history. The studio sought permission from other rights holders to use as many characters as possible.
They work for peanuts.
If those other companies had nixed the use of any of their characters, it really wouldn't have impacted much on the film's actual story. It's just that the extra colour of having those familiar faces pop up unexpectedly here and there does give the film an extra dimension. Not every character they wanted was able to be used, so no Popeye or Tom and Jerry. But crucially, Warner Brothers did allow many of its stable of characters to appear in cameos. There were obviously some caveats on designs and how the characters could be used, but as most of the characters were just a line or two, there were not too many major issues. The biggest use of legacy characters in the movie was probably the scene with the dueling pianist ducks, Donald and Daffy. But throughout the film there'd also be Betty Boop, Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, Yosemite Sam, Porky Pig, and many more. And in many cases they were voiced by their original voice actors. In general, the film stuck to characters who'd been created before the setting of the movie 1947, though Robert Zemeckis did make an exception for some of his favourites like Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner.
He weren't no rabbit.
Or a duck.
Or a dog.
Or a little wooden boy.
Or a sheep.
Or a woodpecker.
Or a pussy.
Amblin Entertainment, the production company headed by Steven Spielberg, Frank Marshall and Kathy Kennedy, was brought on as a production partner, though at this point it does feel like somebody passed a law in the 80s where every remotely interesting film of that decade had to have Amblin's fingerprints on it.
You were magnificent.
Was I really?
Better than Goofy.
Richard Williams was hired as animation director and more tests were made. The thing that would bring to life the animated characters was them interacting with physical props. Williams told Zemeckis, if you want a moving camera, then the animators would deal with it rather than having every scene using a static camera. Robert Zemeckis would then end up shooting the film as he would a normal movie. But in his eye, it was more like making an Invisible Man movie. The Toons would knock into things, they would carry objects like guns and cigars, they would make impressions on chairs and beds. An array of mechanical gadgets were used, as well as different types of puppeteering. However, no Muppets were used on the film, apart from my Uncle Terry, who was one of the carpenters who built the sets. Now, he was a right Muppet.
This ain't no cartoon, you know.
The film spent a lot of time on the verge of cancellation, and indeed it would take several years to make. The film's original budget estimate started off rather high, was reduced, but then ended up around the original estimate of $50 million, which was a lot of money for an animated film, and truth be told, was a lot of money for any film in the mid to late 80s.
Would have been here right after you called, but I had to shake the weasels.
Some exteriors were shot in sunny Los Angeles, while interiors were shot in the UK at Elstree Studios. Now that was a stroke of genius, because doing it the other way around would have only worked half as well.
I'm looking for a murderer.
Several actors were considered for the main role of Eddie Valiant. Several actors were offered the role of Eddy Valiant. Several actors turned down the role of Eddy Valiant. There wasn't really much point of having a shortlist if nobody was particularly interested in playing straight man to a cartoon rabbit in a movie for Disney. Bob Hoskins had done a lot of work in British productions, with Roger Rabbit being his first major starring role in an American production.
Toons gets him every time.
Eddy Valiant starts off as a drunk with a chip on his shoulder about Toons, but he's so desperate that he swallows his pride to take on a lousy job just because he needs the $100 fee.
Hide me, Eddie! Please!
Charles Fleischer was often cast as larger-than-life characters, and he provided the voice of Roger Rabbit. He'd also be on set in a Roger Rabbit costume to stay in character. I mean, that's called commitment.
I don't! You do! I don't! You do! I don't!
You don't.
I do!
Fleischer would also provide the voices for some of the Weasels and Benny the Cab, though history does not record whether Fleischer was dressed as a cab for that last one.
I'd do anything for my husband, Mr. Valiant. Anything.
An uncredited Kathleen Turner provided the unforgettable voice of Jessica Rabbit. Joanna Cassidy was Dolores, somebody who'd been disappointed by Eddie so many times, and as Judge Doom, Christopher Lloyd, playing a character that was a toon but trying to hide the fact for most of the film. Much of the rest of the cast were British actors, or Americans who worked in the UK. Full-sized rubber models of the toons were used to help block out shots and help actors with their eye lines. There is more than a little skill required to act convincingly with something that's not actually there while you're filming. The biggest giveaway is often not giving the actors something to look at. Many of the voiceover artists would be off camera feeding lines to the actors. For a film that was going to need a lot of optical compositing to marry live action and animated elements, giant VistaVision cameras were used. These cameras ran 35mm film sideways, which produced a much more detailed image than a standard unit, an image that would stand up to being repeatedly run through optical printers.
I always knew I'd get it in Toontown.
Optical printers had 2 or more projectors used to combine film images re-photographed by another camera. With film, anytime you wanted to superimpose images, composite them, have wipes or dissolve, or even just add titles, you used an optical printer, which often meant a slight loss of image quality, which of course is helped immeasurably by starting with VistaVision. That is the thing about an effects-heavy movie. Half the story of the movie was how it was done. If we were reviewing something like Footloose, we'd talk about the choreography. Or, for Full Metal Jacket, we'd talk about the recreation of Vietnam. Or, if we were reviewing a Steven Seagal movie, we'd talk about the cast and crew trying very hard to be diplomatic and never ever imply that the star was an insufferable jerk-off.
No.
That's right.
I mean, I'm an effects nerd, where the mechanics of how they do stuff always fascinates me. It might bore you, but it just fascinates me. Particularly things like optical printers. I once tried to build my own optical printer using a pair of 16mm film projectors and a movie camera. But all I ended up doing was ruining a pair of 16mm projectors and 2 movie cameras. I mean, it's a very long story.
What are we gonna do?
That's all this wee stuff.
Combining animation and live action was not a new thing, but it was never an easy thing to do. Just sticking a 2D animated image on top of a live-action background plate would seem a bit odd, like a birthday cake made out of sausages. The Toon characters in Roger Rabbit would have shading elements and lighting effects photographed as separate passes to give them a quasi-3-dimensional look. A single character might be made up of up to 4 different pieces of film, and then it was all handed over to Industrial Light and Magic to put it all together on a working optical printer. Oh, look at me and my working optical printer. Look, I assure you, I am not bitter. ILM would add its own touches, including more lighting effects and the sparkling dress worn by Jessica Rabbit. This was a film made before computers took over animation and compositing, which means there are times where the strings are showing, both literally and figuratively. But registration errors and visible wires don't detract from the film all that much. Alan Silvestri composed a soundtrack that would mix the elements of a jazzy film noir movie with a big orchestral score from the era of classic cartoons. It's the cherry on top of an amazing presentation. Who Framed Roger Rabbit has its human cast playing everything with total seriousness.
He always is funny, or only on days when he's wanted for murder?
Joanna Cassidy gets to play some ridiculous lines with all the seriousness of a character in a Raymond Chandler story.
Toon killed his brother, dropped the piano on his head.
Hoskins is playing the typical deadbeat detective who finally realizes he doesn't actually need another drink. Christopher Lloyd starts off as a scary villain who turns into a literal cartoon. The movie is full of cartoon logic at work, and sometimes it's a bit darker than a typical 80s movie aimed at kids. People or toons are dying everywhere.
Keep it up! You're killing it!
Though of course if you just watched an old Warner Brothers cartoon, some of those do go to some quite dark places at times. I had seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit in a cinema when it came out, and at the time I remember liking it a lot rather than being absolutely in love with it. I like it more now than I did then. When the film was first previewed in an unfinished state, some test audiences absolutely hated it. But as Robert Zemeckis had final cut and believed the finished film would work, he kept the movie as he wanted it. When Who Framed Roger Rabbit was released in the summer of 1988, it was a big hit and would end up as the highest grossing movie of that year, in its home market at least. But the studio, who had gone from being lucky to have even one film in the top 20 films in terms of box office, would end 1988 with having 4 films in the top 20 movies of that year.
Thanks. I needed that.
While Roger Rabbit was a hit with its own merch and a series of shorts, now that's animated shorts, not the wearable type, it did prove to be a relatively short-lived phenomenon.
The whole thing stinks like yesterday's diapers.
But it would lay some of the groundwork for those massive animated hits of the 90s. Still, ideally I would have loved to have seen another team-up featuring Hoskins and Fleischer. If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
What are you seeing, that guy?
He makes me laugh.